Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Paul David Spradley, and I'm joined by Dr. Victoria Mattingly, and we are having a series of conversations that our clients have brought to our attention that said, hey, these are tough. How do you have these conversations? How do you talk about these things? And so we're going to dive into that today. And today, we're going to be talking about white fragility. It's a term that was made popular by the book by Robin DiAngelo. But Victoria, what are your thoughts on some of the challenges that are coming up around this idea of white fragility?
Yeah, just today, Paul, I was, just checking out news feeds and whatnot, and always just trying to hear more about what conversations people are having about race in the workplace right now. And I'm seeing a lot of backlash against the book, particularly. So, and I think it's both the concept and the book. So just to, level set, white fragility is this idea that whenever being addressed with the racism, white people tend to respond with defensiveness and guilt, and it's this whole reckoning and a very negative emotional experience.
Yeah,
And
it might be deflecting, it might be
Mhm.
diminishing. So
Exactly, like it gets at that, oh well, I'm not a racist, right? And everything that leads one to say such things and all the emotions behind it. And I'm seeing a backlash today more than since this self-education and seeing a lot of accolades for the book, but I'm seeing a lot of backlash both from Black people and from white people. And I just wanted to chat a little about the concept of white fragility and your perspective on it, and how you use the concept at all, like with your clients and your conversations, and also like how to make sense of, is white fragility something that's an important thing to educate others on, educate ourselves on, or is there some validity to these arguments against it?
yes, I'm curious to hear what the arguments were, like if there was one or two, because I actually, so one of the questions that you asked was, do I use that term when I'm educating it? And the truth is I don't, right? Like I help people understand it from different perspectives. I do recognize it though, because it comes up, right? And it's a lot of times it will be sort of the crossed arms, the defensiveness, or it's everybody but me. And it's sort of, one of the, when we train, one of the things that we try to make very clear for folks is that the work has to start internally, right? Like you have to be able to lean into this work because racism has impacted negatively Black people and white people. So I, as a Black male, might look at another Black male and say, he's not qualified because I've been conditioned to think that, right? And so that's the impact of racism on me. But before, I can't grow if I don't address that, right? So and I, kudos to Robin DiAngelo for, I would say, starting the conversation, because a lot of folks will deflect. They will not take ownership. So what she's doing is she's starting the conversation internally, and people, they don't like that.
Yeah, yeah.
What are your
And
thoughts?
I mean, I fully agree. Well, first off, seeing it happen in the work we do and seeing it happen, in those seats whenever I'm on the facilitator side of training. But also, I do feel like this, just having words, to be able to label what this experience is and how this happens, I think is really powerful, just as powerful as, whenever the conversation of implicit bias, unconscious bias started. Like that's really powerful that we have words to put to this experience of what it means to let our biases, take over and have these unintentional effects on our behaviors, right? But what had happened with unconscious bias training in the DE&I space and the backlash with that is, the education can't just stop there. We're unveiling all of these, underlying mechanisms that, explain how systemic bias like is upheld, or sustain how, we can continue, not hiring any sort of diversity over years and decades of a company's history. But it doesn't give the solution, it just builds the awareness. But I think we need both. We need the awareness first to then be able to properly act upon it. And I think what I'm seeing with a lot of this backlash, at least from the authors, people of color who I've read, the critiques of the book, a major backlash is, well, this is a book written by a white woman, and we need to be amplifying and educating ourselves on the Black perspective right now, which I think is a valid point. But it's also, it's not the whole story. And this is where things get, like, even I'm having a hard time like articulating like what I'm trying to say right now.
Yeah. So I, if I can jump in, I really think that it is important to amplify the Black voice. And it's
Yes.
also important, like, I think people understand this work as an if and instead of a, like, this can happen as well as this can happen, right? Like, so they put a period in to say only that you only can amplify Black voices right now because that's what this movement is about. No, that is incredibly important. However, doing the work that we do, we come across people who don't have the capacity on the front end to have a conversation about race. And so they might need to hear it from someone who looks like them. And that's what Robin DiAngelo, that's where white authors are coming in, Tim Wise and Robin DiAngelo and folks like that, who are able to say, all right, I'm a white person, and here's what that looks like for me to have navigated through all my privilege and things. And I'm telling you, it's a real thing. And I'm telling you, here's what it looks like for us to take a step. And in Robin DiAngelo's case, she's saying one of the steps is to recognize how you react when you're told about your behavior, right? Like, so, and I'll give you a real life example. Like, there was a person I was working with, and I would sit in meetings and would say something, and then they would take what I would say and not give me credit for it, right? They would just sort of, and so I reached out to the person and say, hey, listen, you are diminishing my voice. You're silencing me by taking away what I've said and contributing to the conversation and sort of changing it. And the person got incredibly defensive and said, I wouldn't do that. Like, and I said, but you did, right? Like, so it is helpful. So in that present moment, white fragility is happening. I can't educate on what this is, but there might be a white person who can come into that conversation and say, hey, listen, what you just did back there is the thing that we're trying to break down and address, right? Like, so it's helpful when there are people that are from the white community who are having conversations about the different steps and stages. And it also, like, we need to be hearing from Black voices to understand the Black experience, to understand what does that mean for Black and brown people in America to have lived through such incredibly horrible time. If you were wearing heels and you stepped on my shoe, on my foot, and I had sandals on, flip-flops, it would hurt. And if I told you that you stepped on me and it hurt, and you didn't acknowledge that, well, no, it wasn't me, it had to be somebody else, but there's nobody else. Like, I'm telling you, what you did hurt me. How are we going to grow? Like, how will we ever get to that place where you're not stepping on my foot if you don't even acknowledge the fact that what I'm saying is accurate or valid, right?
Yeah. And like, I love that analogy. And white fragility in this case is this barrier that's put up that leads me to then say, well, I don't wear heels to hurt people. I wear heels I'm wearing heels to fight my own race, my own sexism against me as a woman that makes me have better credibility if I'm 4 inches taller and wear these heels, you know, and how dare you even accuse me, you know? Meanwhile, yeah, we're not getting at the core of the problem, which is the fact that harm was done, and because there's this white fragility barrier in place, we can't even have the conversation around the harm that was done. Something else about white fragility is just like, you know, a lot of some of the responses I've seen against it, you know, very tongue-in-cheek, like, oh, thank you, white people, for after, you know, hundreds of years of our country built on, you know, racism, now you're finally caring and finally, you know, wanting to do something about that. And yes, that is a sad point to make, but like, what good is starting off a think piece like with that tone, right? Because like, for me, yes, we're far overdue, right? We have so much work to be done, but like, I love how you started with how are people coming into these conversations. Like, I don't want to penalize someone for finally seeing like the errors of their ways and finally like turning that point. And it's a really fine line of like not causing the white fragility to happen, but also not coddling too. And I'm always trying to figure out how to properly walk that line, you know, having that accountability, but still having it come from a place of compassion and just like awareness that, you know, this is hard and uncomfortable work, and thank you for being a part of it, versus penalizing you for not joining soon enough. And I mean, I just wanted to have this conversation with you today, Paul, because I just see more and more of it being white versus black and binary thinking and us versus them. And even though there's rationale behind those stances, I just personally think we need to be coming together more right now than being as divisive as we are. And I'm curious, like, your take on that, or if I'm being too kumbaya-y over here.
You are being incredibly kumbaya. But that's essentially what, I mean, our role in this world is to guide people to that, right? To get like, and we understand that it's a journey, and that people are in different places, different starting points on that journey. And so for me, when I encounter, you know, white fragility, that's not my place to call it out. Imagine how that would turn out, right? Like for a black man to then in real time to call a white person fragile. It doesn't allow for the conversation to continue. It probably would allow better for a white person to call out another white person in that fragile space. What I do is I try to ask questions, right? So even earlier I said, like, I'm just curious about the people who wrote these comments. How are they coming into the conversation? Why are they saying this and taking this stance? Because it's only a piece of this bigger thing. And so if I could ask you a question to also have you think about, like, if you're thinking about this, and I can ask you a question to think about this and maybe this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that then creates at least a bit more opportunity for us to do what we do.
Yeah. I think if I had to take away from this, especially for like white people wanting to do the right thing and self-educate properly, I would say still read the book White Fragility. Mm-hmm. Then read a critique, which I'll put 2 in the comments from different perspectives, and then go out and find some more self-education written by Black authors as well. We need both perspectives right now, and to be a true ally and to really do the work in this space. I think just abandoning a whole line of thought and a whole concept that can be really powerful in your own self-discovery and self-work is not the right approach, but you know, not what we need to be abandoning is binary thinking and broadening our horizons by getting multiple perspectives, not just one or the other.
Yeah.
That would be my takeaway.
And I have a very similar takeaway, I think, when we're talking about the idea of white fragility, that it is like understand what the concept is behind the idea, to help. So before you judge it, understand the concept behind it. But then, as you had said earlier, there's a second piece of this. Like, this is just like opening your eyes. Mm-hmm. The next step is then, how do you stop doing that thing? How do you stop minimizing that voice? How do you stop deflecting when it comes, right? How do you take that action? So this is awareness. But there's some action that has to be taken on the back end as well too. So that's my takeaway.
Absolutely. I love it. Another great conversation with you, Paul. So thanks for taking the time for it.
No problem.